Okay, because there's a couple of folk that join us afterwards. So M. Hazelwood and Anthony. Okay, so look, where is God? Looking for faith in the midst of suffering. A 6-week Bible study in the book of Job, and we are on session 4. So welcome to session 4 of our series on the book of Job. Just a reminder that the premise of these studies is to rethink what the book of Job is for. It is not primarily to answer the question of why God allows suffering. Rather, it is answering the question, where is God when we suffer? Where is God in the midst of all of this? So in session 1, just as a recap, we saw the narrative that starts off the book. So in a discussion between God and Satan, the righteous man Job is singled out as a case study. Does Job only seek God because he lives a blessed life? And Job has a blessed life. He's got all these camels and donkeys and lots of obedient, loving children, and etc., etc. And all of this is taken away from him. And so Satan strips away his possessions, takes his children, leaves his body in a mess. Still, Job does not sin by cursing God. That's how we left session 1. Session 2 is a discussion between Job and his 3 friends. And as the discussion progresses, we see them become more bold in their assertions that Job must be a great sinner to have so much suffering. And Job responds by starting to outline his good deeds and the status he so misses. His main concern, though, is that he may see God to plead his cause. He longs for someone to plead his cause and comes to conclude that God himself would speak for him and vindicate him. But he comes in the end to wonder if God has really become his enemy. Yet in this, he still wants to seek God. He wonders if God's got it in for him, but he still wants to see more of God. So in session 3, we saw that poem in the middle of the book of Job. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. In the middle of suffering, we find God in new ways. Some translations call this an interlude, as if it were a break in the main argument of the book. And it is a poem about the search for wisdom that is more precious than gold and rubies. The conclusion of the poem is that wisdom is only found in the fear of the Lord, i.e., it is only in seeking God that true wisdom is found. So it's my conjecture that far from being an interlude, that this is the center of the book. In the middle of suffering, we can find Job in new and unexpected ways. The way to God is worth the struggle, more than digging for precious metals and gemstones. So this is the graph that I should have had last week, really. Really, this is the center of the book. This is the structure of the book. And you see here the introduction on the bottom left of your screen, and then the friends, then the discussion between Job and his friends. And there's a little monologue of Job. It ends with 4 or 5 chapters of Job putting reiterating his cause. Really, we haven't spent too much of that. And in the middle of that is the search for wisdom poem. And you see, I keep on pointing at my own screen, and that won't do any good at all, will it? And then from the other side, rather than seeing us as then continuing down, they're both leading up towards the middle. So you've got the Elihu monologue that we're looking at today, what Elihu says, and then God speaks, and then there's the conclusion. So you see there with the search for wisdom right at the center. I just made this one up this morning, so it's not the best graph. I hope that makes it clear how I see the structure of the book. So here we are. Okay, so Today we come to the wisdom of Elihu. He's a young man, and some say that it's Elihu who is probably the writer of the book. Some say that Elihu speaking up is just a reiteration of the philosophy of Job's friends. Elihu speaks up because he sees that older, wiser heads have not been able to answer Job adequately. They have focused on Job's sins and not been able to explain things to him. They've got the wrong end of the picture, wrong end of the understanding that the three friends have messed up. And so he focuses on some of what Job has said. He says, I am clean from sin, but God treats me as his enemy. So Elihu claims that he's got something different to say to the three friends. He starts by saying that Job was not proved wrong by any of the three friends, that Job had got it right and the friends had got it wrong. So he's saying he's different, but then he says that Job didn't quite get it right either. So he's saying that he's better than all of them. It kind of rings true, the arrogance of youth. Do you know what a young person thinks they've always got all the answers? And maybe they come with a fresh perspective that helps sometimes. But he takes some of what his understanding is of what Job has said. And sometimes what he claims Job has says, when you look back at it, it's not quite what Job was saying. But hey, Job says, who goes on to deal with some of Job's points. Job says, I am clean from sin, but God treats me as an enemy. Elihu says that Job has read the situation incorrectly, that God is not his enemy, that God speaks to us in many ways. Doesn't seem to me to be answering the main point. But Elihu doesn't address the issue of Job being sinless here. Instead, he points out that God speaks in many different ways. He speaks in visions and dreams. Elihu, of course, this is one of the oldest books in the Bible. Yeah. So Elihu did not have the scriptures to point to or Jesus Christ. He didn't even have the Old Testament. The Old Testament hadn't been written. So he doesn't talk about God speaking through scriptures and through writings at all. God uses suffering, he says, to turn people from pride and wrongdoing. And sometimes someone might hear God on their bed of pain, says Elihu, and turn to God and be delivered. And they would say that I sinned, but God saved me. Was that right for Elihu, for Job? And the second thing is, he says that God denies me justice. And Job thinks that he deserves justice, and God has denied it by not speaking with him. Here Elihu points out again that God is God, right? So God cannot be unjust. He's free to act as he chooses. This is God is God. He's in charge of the whole universe. Here Elihu points out again that God has the right to snuff out all lives in an instant. If God decided to wipe out humanity and start all over again, fair enough, he's got the right to do that. Because he's God. Yeah. Princes and kings mean nothing. That's right, Polly. There's lots of reasons that you might want to. Princes and kings mean nothing to God as well. He's not going to, any judgments that he makes are not going to be subject to favoritism, because there's nothing any prince or king could give to God to sway his opinion. He's not going to be touched by a bribe, is he? Because he's God. He's already got everything. So God is not going to act unjustly. And then he says, that Job would be tested more for talking like a wicked man. Job's sin here is to question God's justice, and in his desire to see God, he does in fact sin, for God cannot be unjust. Again, it's an argument about God's awesome power and therefore his right to administer justice without favour. The other thing he's got Job saying is, I am in the right and not God. Okay, so and he's right. There's a little bit of pride creeping into Job, because he says, I've not sinned, I've not deserved this bad treatment that I've had, and therefore, God must be in the wrong, and that, my friends, is pride. Even though he's still got a little bit of pride left in him, as our Job. Okay, and Elihu says, God is so far above us, how can you think you deserve anything from God? It's kind of my interpretation of what he says in chapter 35. Elihu points out that God is powerful and perfect. It makes no difference to him whether or not people sin. Doesn't make it. If we question God's justice, it's without merit. He is so far above us to be laughable. If he doesn't respond when people plea about the wicked winning, why on earth is he going to respond to Job in his cry of pain? And he says here, you have no right for God to hear you. You don't. None of us has a right to expect anything from God. That God gives us things and blesses us and loves us and cares for us, as we know, because Jesus came. And when you think of God's awesome power and majesty and distance from us, the fact that he sends his only son to die for us becomes even more amazing, even more astounding. But we don't deserve anything. We don't. It's not because, oh, we've been such good human beings that we deserve such and such from God. So this is what he's saying. God's so far above us. How can you think that that you deserve anything from God? This is what Elihu says. Elihu then goes on and talks a little bit more from his own thoughts, really, rather than saying that he's responding to something that Job has said. He goes on from discussing Job's errors to a more widespread discussion of how God is superior in his knowledge and actions, how far above us he is. He starts by discussing how God can use suffering as a tool for correction. That God is supreme in his knowledge and actions, he says. He goes as far as to say, this is the one that I found kind of bowled me over a bit, that God is wooing us with suffering.
I prefer chocolate.
Yes, I prefer chocolate too, but God is showing us his love through suffering, that he is teaching us and training us through suffering. And he says the righteous man suffers in order to learn from the experience. And there's some of that in the New Testament. When we come to the question time, we'll consider a passage from the New Testament that talks about that. He goes as far as to say that God is wooing us from the jaws of distress. Those who are counted among the righteous may suffer in order to gain contentment and knowledge. I think there's some truth that when my chest pain was really bad and I could just about sit in a room, there's one time I was starting to recover and I could come back to church, but I would sit quietly in the corner and not do very much because I didn't feel I could without being ill. And it made me a lot quieter than I used to be, probably than I am now as well. But actually, there's a contentment in just being there that I learned from that experience. So I think there's some truth in that we learn contentment and knowledge. And then Elihu builds to his main theme again. I'll come back to that. God being in the right is all based on his power and majesty. And this then links us into when God speaks. Because when God speaks, we'll see next week, is all about God's power and majesty in creation, and how that answers Job. And this speech from Elihu kind of links the two together, because it links us back to the idea of Job's status of relationship with God. But there is one, because God does speak, God does answer Job. It's not all kind of bad news. And here he talks about the water cycle. Did you all learn this at school? How the water cycle works? I did. I can remember learning that, the water evaporates off the sea here and goes up into clouds, and the clouds move across and onto the land, and the rain comes down, and the water goes down through the streams and rivers and underneath and out towards the sea, and then it evaporates again. And there you've got the water cycle, and it's almost as though Elihu kind of half knows this. He's kind of got an inkling of it. But he talks about the water cycle, and he discusses how moisture goes upwards, the clouds move, the waters around, and the rains come down, sometimes preceded by thunder and lightning to tell you God's rains are on the way. Sometimes God moves with ice and snow, and the clouds of rain can both be a punishment, presumably in flood, or in ways that are too powerful to cope with, the waters, or a blessing, watering the earth to produce crops. This is chapter 37:13. I guess a recognition that an experience can be both good and bad, depending on how you react to it. Even the sun is mysterious, is a mystery in how it races across the sky. It is because Job doesn't understand how all of this works that he should accept that God is beyond his reach. So he's actually using the water cycle as an example of how wonderful and mysterious are the ways of God. Now, we understand how the water cycle works. So you could say, well, does that mean, well, we don't think God's got anything to do with it the more we learn about science? Well, I don't think so. Though I think it's one of Donald Rumsfeld's known unknowns. There are things we know, there are things we don't know, and there are things we know we don't know. And I think the more scientists know, the more they realise they don't know about this universe of ours, and how mysterious and we may understand how the water cycle works now when Elihu didn't, but every discovery of science raises questions.
Mark Twain it was who said it's a wise man who knows how stupid he is.
Yeah, right, exactly. So I think, although you could argue that actually what he says about the water cycle we now understand, that doesn't negate the argument in the passage that which says, because we don't understand nature, there's so much in the world, in the universe, that we don't know, that the mysteries of God and how He has put things together we're to live in awe of them. And so nowadays we understand how the water cycle operates. We can predict the weather fairly accurately, although still very little can be done about it, other than battening down the hatches or escaping to higher ground. Even though we understand much, Elihu's points are still well made. There is a vast amount that we do not understand about how the universe remains. If anything, what we do know about the universe should leave us in more awe of God who made it all. And that's the end. So Elihu's main arguments are all about God and about his power. So here are his main points: that God made the universe and is so far beyond us that it's ridiculous that God should be answerable to Job. Why on earth should God be answerable to Job? He's one man, and God is God of the entire universe. Isn't that, when you think about it, come on, that's just crazy. And secondly, God made the universe, and so he made justice. He is in charge of all justice and will act justly because he is God. And thirdly, in his suffering, it is so that God can teach Job and restore him. God desires Job to be restored. That's a new perspective from Elihu that the three friends before didn't really bring, this idea of restorative suffering. So I'm not really commenting now whether Elihu was right or not, or whether the text doesn't really say whether Elihu was right or not, but we'll discuss it in the questions afterwards. But it's a different perspective, and it leads us towards God speaking in the next few chapters. It's all about, rather than going back and forth about how good or bad Job is, it's about focusing on God in the midst of the suffering. So there we are. And next time, please read, if you're going to prepare for us, read chapters 38 to 41. Good little chapters, all about God speaking. And yeah, it's only 4 chapters. That's not much, is it? Get that done in half an hour. Sometime between now and oh, not. You've got 2 weeks because I'm on holiday next week. So thank you very much. I'm going to stop the screen share, and we're going to. I'm going to also stop the recording, and then we'll have a chat. Okay.